The anchor delivered the news with piercing eyes and a dramatic voice. He did a great job of expressing the severity of the situation. There was a malfunction in the nearby prison security system, which we know now is largely due to the prison warden's attempts to be more eco-friendly. Batteries die and solar panels suck in stadies where there are more clouds than sunlight. We weren't the only ones who chose to stay home and wait it out. There were a few families who simply had nowhere to go. Some would rather die than leave home. Their names you might have seen briefly in the news. We bought some food in excess and boarded up windows and doors. The same stuff we all see in movies. Only we didn't have any guns. My girlfriend, Lucy, hated them. She is a firm believer in gun control. The orange jumpsuits had fled into the forest and left in every direction. Being the closest town, it made sense to pack up and leave, but as I said, not everybody thought so. With a total of 17 escapees running in every direction, there would be about 5 hitting the town at most. All of this was theory, of course, but our false confidence established this theory as fact in our minds. Let them come. The police would stop them before they reached us. Yes, with hindsight, we were idiots. I've thought up several excuses for what we did, from simply having never experienced any real crime to thinking we never would. At the end of the day, we were still fools for staying. We realized it when we heard voices outside our home that night. Lucy became stiff, as if shocked by a jolt of electricity. At some point, it was like a constant current was running through her as she started moving around so fast and shaking like a leaf. I was no better. I couldn't figure out which side of the house the voices were coming from. My first idea being that we leave the house and make a run for the car. Another dumb move we luckily didn't make. Instead, we took advantage of the crawl space beneath our floor. It wasn't a protected basement or a bunker, but it was something. We had the hatch beneath the carpet in our living room. The handle was removed, so I had to use a screwdriver to pry it open. Together, we put our fingers beneath the lip and lifted it. It was heavier than it looked, but the wood floor was old and thick, so it made sense. Lucy crawled under there first, taking a bag of food and a few water bottles with her. I followed after, draping the carpet on top of the hatch and lowering it carefully. I didn't want the carpet to bunch up anywhere. With a thud, the hatch was in place and I was crawling along the dusty ground to the still form of my Lucy. The front door was bashed in by the time I reached her. She took my hand in hers, and I held it as the door finally gave way. Crappy nails and a few planks didn't offer much in the way of security. We were terrified. We knew we were in a vulnerable position, one we didn't know how long we had to be in before help found us, if it ever did. That was the start of our torture. The first footsteps tramped above us. The intruders moved quickly, running further into the house. I heard them enter my office, the guest room, and our bedroom. I heard doors being slammed, wardrobes pulled open. I'm sure they looked under the beds. The prisoners weren't quiet, but they didn't speak either. It was tough to make out how many there were, maybe 5 or 6. I guess I didn't expect so many to be working together, so maybe it's true that gangs in prisons are pretty close-knit. Not something I thought about at that moment. I was just alarmed when they turned the lights on. Light flowed between the gaps in the floorboards. There wasn't a gap wider than my little finger, but it still felt like they were far too large. I saw the way the light curved along Lucy's body, and she looked so weak, so frail. I could see her wide eyes as she looked at me. I saw the fear before she closed them tight, mouthing something quickly to herself. A silent prayer. I reached for her but stopped when I heard a scream. It came from right above us, making us both jump. Lucy made a small sound, but not loud enough to be heard. The scream carried on for a moment before falling silent. When it did, there was the sound of someone falling, a short burst of thumps as a body hit the ground. We could see where the body fell from the light it blocked. There was another moment of silence before they started speaking. "About time I was getting sick of him," one voice said. "He was never one of us." The voice was slow, steady. I heard the sounds of tearing plastic and the click of a lighter. The man speaking had found my cigarettes and decided to help himself. "Do you want to use him for anything? Or can I?" The voice right above us said. "He must have been the killer. We can use him. Put him over there for now and go get the others, will ya?" The smoking one said. "You want to do it here?" "Initiation doesn't have a set time, Samuel. Hurry along. You two go with him. 3 sets of steps left the house. Silence came quickly. Eventually, all we could hear was the smoking man puffing at a cigarette slowly and dramatically, as if he were savoring the taste. It was so quiet that we both didn't dare to move, choosing to play dead. I didn't even want to turn my heat. Lucy must have felt the same way, as I didn't hear a peep from her. It was a good hour of waiting, listening to the man go around the house. He spent a lot of time in the kitchen, putting stuff on the counter in the living room. Whenever he was far enough away, we took the opportunity to get in more comfortable positions, mainly ones where we could move without making so much noise. Once more, Lucy's hand found mine, and I held onto it tight. We heard more voices and laughter. An entire crew of convicts had entered our home. I think I even glimpsed the orange of their clothes, but I could be mistaken. One thing is for sure, they were very happy. Their laughter wasn't any different from friends having a night out or even teenagers after school ended. It was only when they walked into my home that they changed their tune. Their laughter died, as did the heaviness of their footsteps. It was like they were trying to be polite while intruding, but I soon understood why when the smoking man spoke. "Lights, Samuel, if you please," he said, putting on airs of sophistication. Samuel snickered and did as the man asked. The lights were turned off, but the room wasn't completely dark. It took me a moment to realize candles had been lit. "Thank you. I think we all find this a lot more appropriate." Another click of the lighter. "I really shouldn't smoke during the initiation, but I think you can forgive me. It's been some time since I walked free. Longer than most of you, I should say." There was a collective hum of agreement. "I don't imagine it will be long before we are found and taken back. But before that happens, I think we should make this all official. Now's as good of a time as any, as I was telling Samuel. Bear in mind, there is no going back. You've all made your decision by entering this house, etc., etc. You can try to run, but Samuel will stop you. Not try to stop you, will stop you. Is that clear?" There was a beat, and then the smoking man picked it up. "Fantastic. I have to say, it's been a while since I've seen so many ready to take the step. A lot of cowards, weaklings out there, morons who wish to be something other than devout followers and think we are the best option after that. There is a God, gentlemen and woman, and that is me." Samuel made a coughing sound as if to clear his throat. "Don't you start with me. By the way, which do you think will be the first to find us? Him or Mike?" "Do you really need to ask?" Samuel said. I could hear the smile. "Best begin now before Michael finds us." "So right you are. Now you do have a choice in your initiation. Each one is presented on the table. I want you all to take your pick. Now!" There was a scramble as the convicts ran to the table. There had to be 20 of them, pushing against each other, climbing over furniture and knocking over objects. It was chaos. I heard things break, curses spat, and yelps of pain. All that noise was followed by the smoking man and Samuel's laughter. "You there, you've got yours. Bring it here," the smoking man ordered. "I might need your help, Samuel. There are a lot of them." "I will try not to disappoint," Samuel said, this time boasting the words with eagerness. "You there, give it to me and close your eyes. I will try to be gentle." "Ha, you twisted bastard," the smoking man called as the commotion began. What follows isn't fit to write down, and thinking about it brings me all kinds of pain. Even if I omit most of it, I can still only describe it as a vision of torment. The scream that jolted us at the start was nothing compared to the screams that followed. There was so much noise that we didn't care if we made any noise ourselves. I wrapped my arms around Lucy, and she did the same for me. I did my best to cover her ears and smother her cries. Among the screams and in the moments of silence, there was heavy breathing and the sounds of blood dripping. It was soft at first, barely audible, but all around us puddles began to form. I could feel that sickening warmth hit my leg and soak into my clothes. I can remember the different cries, the stages, the levels of pain. I can remember the words they said with each sound, the sequences of their suffering. Detachment saved my mind from additional damage, but by then they were nearly done. There were a few more cries that followed, but they ended with disturbing sounds inflicted by whatever weapons Samuel and the Smoking Man had on hand. Not a bad night, the Smoking Man said. Don't know if he will be happy with it, but I sure am. What do you think? They will do. You just enjoy the initiations, don't you? I don't have the mind for bigger things, Samuel answered. I am merely a tool. I have so little respect for you that I almost hate you, you know that? I don't care. He is almost here. He must have heard. The Smoking Man sighed. Well, do you think there is time to deal with those two hiding under the floor? The Smoking Man asked. There is only one way to find out. The two ran towards the part of the room where the hatch was located. We were frozen in fear, thinking the worst was about to happen. Then there was light. It was blinding and pure. I could see all the dust and cobwebs in the crawl space. I saw a bright portal open as the hatch was lifted. I heard voices, but couldn't make out the words. I saw a bloodied hand curl around the edge and hold on to it until it finally gave in, dragged away by something. The light faded, and darkness returned. Lucy and I were found by the police much later. We were asleep when they did, still holding on to each other. We wouldn't wake up, no matter how much they prodded us and yelled. Eventually, they thought something was wrong, and with the help of paramedics, they pulled us out of the crawl space. We finally woke up in the back of an ambulance before it ever left, oxygen masks attached to our faces. After removing them, they gave us a once-over before concluding we were in good health. The police started to talk with us next, and we told them as much as we could remember. It seemed our information wasn't that useful, as there wasn't an escaped prisoner named Samuel, and neither of us had seen the orange clothes of the prisoners. It was still pinned on the prisoners escaping and being unaccounted for. But our story had more holes than Swiss cheese. The cherry on top of our ludicrous experience was the state of our home. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing was broken. No bodies and no blood. Not even the blood I felt hit my pants. They were perfectly clean. While driving through the town, the police saw the door was open. Deciding to investigate, they found an empty home and a hatch open in the living room. That's how they found us. And yes, people closer to us have questioned our sanity, not just cops who needed concrete proof to believe anything. Lucy and I still get angry about it to this day, having those who love us occasionally look at us as if we are crazy. We talk about it sometimes. We write down what we experienced and read it over, but it only raises more questions than it answers. What was the initiation all about? How did they know where we were hiding? What happened after? And why? Something happened to me a few months ago while I was traveling from one end of the country to another. I've tried not to think about it as, try as I might. I just can't seem to explain it. I'm hoping that by posting what happened here, it might help, get my thoughts in order. So, like I was saying, I was traveling from one end of the country to the other. The idea came to me last year. I've lived in the same country all my life, I thought to myself one evening, but I've only ever seen a very small part of it. I enjoyed traveling to other countries, seeing the sights they had to offer and experiencing the different ways of life, yet I'd hardly explored any of my own. I resolved to correct this and began making preparations. I meticulously mapped out my route, stopping in each of the major cities and beauty spots throughout the country before finally coming to a stop at the opposite end. I'll not lie, my excitement was at an all-time high as I set out on what would be my biggest venture yet. I packed the essentials and left, letting my parents and friends know what I was doing in case they needed to get in contact with me. It all went smoothly to start with. I'd had no issues at all and had seen so much. There are some truly beautiful places here, and I was having an amazing time. It wasn't until a few days into my trip that something happened. I was making my way through a more northern part of the country, a very rural area. It was full of small towns, lots of fields for growing crops and raising livestock. You know the type of thing. It looked idyllic, the sounds of nature, and the smell of the grass and wildflowers thick in the air. The sun gave the wheat fields a golden glow as it slowly began to lean towards the horizon. Checking the time on my phone, I realized it would soon be getting dark. I was tired from the long walk of that day. I'd thought it would be a nice idea to walk from the last town I was in to this one, to get the full traveling experience. It had taken me far longer than I expected, and now rather than being in the next town over, I was about 2/3 of the way there, coming up on a small village. With a sinking feeling, I realized there was no way I'd make it to the next town before nightfall, and I was not equipped to continue my trek in the dark. The only source of light I had available to me was my phone, and there was no way it would have enough charge for me to use the torch all of the way there. There was no signal, so I wouldn't have been able to call for a taxi or assistance. The only option available to me was to try and look for somewhere to stay in the nearby village. Its name escapes me now. I never bothered to memorize it when I found it. Just as I reached the outskirts, a sense of hope filled me, as I felt like my prayers had been answered. At the crest of the hill that led down to the village was a large house with a sign out front that read B&B. It looked a little old, but that seemed to add to its rustic charm. It was a quaint-looking little building. Happier now that I'd at least solved one part of my dilemma, I could sleep here and then carry on my trek tomorrow. I made my way across the path to the front door. It was a little stiff and opened with a loud creak, as though its ancient hinges had not been moved for many decades. As soon as it opened, the smell of wildflowers and herbs filled my nostrils. Before me was a large foyer with several seats and magazines on one end, and a large wooden reception desk at the other. The place looked deserted, an old radio providing the only sounds that reached my ears. It was a little eerie, to be honest. "Hello?" I called out as I slowly made my way to the reception desk. A faint sound of movement seemed to come from the room just behind the desk, but there was no answer. There was a bell on the desk with a plaque that read, "Ring for service," adorned on it. Gently pressing the top of the bell, it let out a high-pitched ding. "Hold your horses there. I'm not as fast as I used to be." The wizened voice came from the door behind the desk, followed by the shuffling sounds of shaky footsteps. A few seconds later, the door was gently pushed open to reveal an elderly man, well into his 70s. He slowly shuffled out to the counter before adjusting his glasses and looking at me. "Sorry about that. These old legs don't work like they did, and my ears ain't much better either. Now what can I do you for?" "I'm looking for a room if you have any available. I'm on my way to the next town over, but it's taking me longer than I thought." "Is there anything available just for tonight?" I asked, hopeful that there were vacancies. I know I could have asked to use his phone and call a cab if there weren't, but it felt a little too much like cheating. I'd much prefer to continue my walk. Also, stopping somewhere like this would add to my sense of exploration, finding some hidden spots that aren't on any map. "Why, sure. Take your pick. I recommend room 3 on the top floor as it's got the best view of the village," he said, waving his hand to show the rack of keys to his right, all the while holding a faraway gaze, as though he was looking right through me. As he extended his arm, I noticed a large red mark in the middle of his forearm. It was a bold red. A deep, angry cut was clearly visible amongst the mottled gray and blue tones of his aged arm. It looked like he'd had a very nasty accident recently. Something about it made my skin crawl, and I turned my attention back to the keys. If the old man saw me looking, he didn't react. "Sure, I'll go with room 3, I said, trying to shake off the strange feeling the old man's arm had given me. "Good choice. That'll be $33 for the night, breakfast included. It starts bright and early, at 8 a.m. If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to call me or my wife, Nancy." "My name's Jerry," he said. His tone seemed jovial, but his expression never changed, as though it were set in stone. He held out his hand, again revealing that glaring wound on his arm that my eyes couldn't help but be drawn to. Tentatively, I took his wrinkled hand in mine and shook it. "If you can't find us wandering around the place, then check out the back. We like to sit out there some nights and admire the view," he said, handing me the key from the rack. "Your room is just up the stairs and on the left." I thanked Jerry, taking the key and beginning to make my way up the stairs to my room. Jerry waved me goodbye. "See you real soon," he said with a cheery notation, although his face still held the same expression it had all of the way through our conversation. I shuddered. He seemed nice enough, but there was something about him that unnerved me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I don't know if it was the faraway look in his eyes as he spoke to me, the strange wounds on his arms, or just the general feeling of the B&B. All these things seemed innocent enough, but I found that as I unpacked in my room, I just couldn't relax. The room itself was beautiful, decorated with a tasteful floral wallpaper on one wall with hues of turquoise and gold. It was bordered by a deep blue on the others, giving the room a calm feel. A floor-to-ceiling mirror occupied the far wall, separated from me by a large king-sized bed. Suddenly, all thoughts of the strangeness of the interaction with Jerry left my mind as I took in the view of the rolling hills and meadows leading to the small village in the distance. It was amazing. This is exactly what I'd wanted on the trip, to see things like this. Things you'd never normally see. It was almost perfect, except for the smell. I couldn't smell it constantly, and when I could, it was very faint. But occasionally, as I turned around or disturbed something, my nostrils would be met with the stench of iron and mildew. I spent a good half an hour scouring the room looking for the source, but everywhere I checked was pristine. Nancy and Jerry obviously took keeping this place clean seriously. I tried to push it to the back of my mind. I could deal with it for one night, I thought to myself, and it wasn't that bad. As I lay in bed, sinking into the comfort of the soft mattress, the fatigue from walking all afternoon soon caught up with me, and my eyes became heavy. I barely managed to read a page of my book before I slipped into a deep slumber. The gentle tapping of something dripping on my face roused me from sleep. My eyes took a second to adjust to my surroundings. I was still in bed in the B&B, but everything looked different. The room had a strange red hue seeping in from under the closed curtains, causing the walls to glow faintly. Blinking away the remnants of sleep, I felt my senses come back to me, along with my vision. I could now clearly see the room. My jaw dropped, and the blood drained from my face. This has got to be a nightmare, I thought to myself. As I surveyed the room, I could now make out what the faint red glow was illuminating. The room had changed. The walls, formerly blue and floral, were now pink and fleshy, peeling in places to reveal dark red sinew and muscle beneath, with snake-like blue veins running along in intervals. Reeling around, the other walls were the same, all looking like they were made of some grotesque fleshy membrane. They were moving, tensing, and contracting rhythmically. Watching them, I couldn't help but be reminded of a worm, contracting and expanding its body to move. The rhythm, some strange invisible heartbeat, was mesmerizing. I could hear screaming coming from somewhere further away. It was loud, and I was frightened. It sounded like whatever was making it was in pain, gradually weakening. It felt muffled against my ears as I watched the rhythmic writhing of the walls of the room, almost hypnotized. A drip hit my face again, snapping me out of my trance. A thick red liquid splattered across me on impact. The stench of iron and mold from before is thick in the air now, coming from this thick liquid. I reached my hand to it, pulling it back to reveal what I could only describe as decaying blood, dark red with black clumps. I nearly vomited, and my mind began reeling. This was a nightmare. This had to be. It was so vivid. It felt so real. I needed to wake up. I tried to wake myself, slapping myself in the face hard. I felt the sharp sting of the impact, expecting to wake up in bed again in the dark. A fresh wave of terror washed over me as I realized I was still exactly where I'd been. Looking around, I was still met with the fleshy, pulsating walls, the deep crimson liquid that was now pooling where my head had been resting, and the horrific screams emanating from somewhere outside of the room. "Nancy? Jerry?" I called out shakily. No one answered my calls. I was only met with the sound of more screaming. Nervously reaching out a hand for the door, I was just about to grab the flabby handle when the sick, squelching noise rose up as the door began to open on its own. I let out a scream, and my legs went weak. a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead and a sickness rising up in my stomach. What I saw in that room had to be a nightmare. The doorway revealed the owner's bedroom. Illuminated by the same red glow as the rest of the B&B, I could make out the fleshy, pulsating walls and the same dripping red liquid. But that's not what made me stumble around and flee. Hanging from the ceiling of the room were the owners. They were suspended a few inches above the ground, their wrinkled, naked bodies exposing the butcher's hooks embedded deeply within their limbs, pulling them tightly at odd angles. They were writhing in pain, contorting as the hooks pulled and tugged with each pulse of the silent heartbeat. Ear-piercing screams left their frail old throats as they were pulled this way and that by the sharp hooks impaled deeply in their limbs. This on its own was horrifying, but it was their faces. I couldn't take my eyes away from their faces. They were grinning, almost smiling, as the chains tried their best to rip them apart, as though they were enjoying every minute of it. A scream forced its way out of my throat as I tried to process what I was seeing. Immediately, their eyes snapped to me, and their faces turned to that same blank expression that Jerry had maintained throughout our interaction earlier. Then, without warning, they both threw their heads back, unleashing an ear-shattering scream before violently thrashing against the hooks and chains, pulling against their taut skin. I watched in horror as it stretched and tore before the hooks swung back and embedded themselves deeper into the couple. Their hands reached out for me. A sense of longing was in their eyes as they screamed. I stumbled backwards, slipping in a puddle of that disgusting red liquid before getting to my feet and running. I needed to get out. I was going mad. I had to be. If this wasn't a nightmare, then that was the only other solution. Another desperate scream escaped the couple's ragged mouths as I turned to flee, my legs feeling like they were fighting against some kind of invisible force. It felt as though I was running in slow motion, the top of the staircase only inching closer no matter how hard I pushed myself. I had to get out of this place, maybe to the local village. Yeah, in the village, there would be someone who could help me there. I rounded the banister, using my momentum to hurl myself down the stairs. I could see the front door now, still made of the same biomass as the rest of the B&B. The world spun as the stairs seemed to shift under my feet, throwing me down like some kind of strange tunnel. I fell until, with a painful thud, I fell onto the warm, squishy flesh of the reception floor. Turning around, I could see the stairs contracting back into place like some sinister muscle, giving the illusion that they were not waiting for another opportunity to strike. Panic took hold again as I observed my surroundings down here on the reception floor. The walls were made of the same flabby flesh as the ones upstairs, and blue and purple veins were pulsing through them in time with the inaudible heartbeat. I wrinkled my nose as I noticed the stench down there. The place already stank, but this wasn't the same smell of iron and decay as I'd smelled upstairs. It seemed fouler, almost aggressive. A slight movement to my left caught my eye. Slowly turning my head towards it, my eyes laid upon a large pool. Its brown surface seemed to be slowly rippling, as though it had been recently disturbed. As I watched the ripples spread, a small series of bubbles began making their way to the surface before gently popping, adding to the mass of ripples. Each pop was accompanied by a rotten, sulfurous stench that made me gag. I began to get to my feet, backing away from the foul odor when I thought I noticed something else breaking the surface. Only for a second. Before it quickly disappeared again. It looked kind of like a skeletal fin, with translucent skin clinging to it, and veins and blood clearly visible within. I didn't have a chance to determine more before it vanished beneath the bubbling waters, releasing yet another stench of death. A cold washed over me as my mind tried to conjure up possibilities for what that thing might be. As the water's surface began to bubble more aggressively, one thought screamed out in my head. Get out. I didn't want to stick around to find out what that thing was. Turning as fast as I could, I begged my legs to run to the door. They sluggishly obeyed, as though they were running through treacle. As I gradually closed the distance between me and the door, the sulfurous stench ever present in the air and getting stronger, I reached a hand towards the flabby lump that was the handle. Grabbing it tightly and wrenching it as hard as I could, I felt it shiver in my fingers, as though a jolt of pain had just flashed through it. I pushed against the door, waiting for the squelching as it slid. Only it didn't. I watched in bemused fear as the door seemed to stretch and solidify, the congealed lump hardening in my hand. I pushed against it, my hand sinking in slightly, but it resisted me. Terror took over and I threw myself against the door frantically. I was trapped. I couldn't be trapped. Over and over again, I threw myself against it. It began to turn a deep purple color where I had slammed my body against it, darkening with each impact. My shoulder was burning, each impact with the solid mass causing a flash of pain to shoot through my side. I was about to give up when, with a wet, tearing sound, it started to give. I took a run up and slammed into it one more time, hearing that wet tearing as the door was wrenched from its socket, and dark red liquid spewed forth from where it was previously clinging. I sprawled out into the world outside of the B&B, a sense of relief filling me. That is, until I was able to process what my eyes were seeing. It was the same. My hands, now on what should have been the paving slabs outside leading to the front door, were pressed into the same fleshy mass that the B&B seemed to be composed of. No, I thought to myself. No, this isn't real. It's not real. I got out. I just want to wake up. But try as I might, it was futile. A part of me deep down knew that I was awake and that everything here was real. I just couldn't accept it. I looked around for anything, any sign of what to do or where to go. As I scanned the landscape, a sense of hopelessness smothered me, sapping my will to even move. The path was made of the same pulsating flesh, lined with thick black hairs where the patches of grass on either side should be. A burning red sun illuminated the world in a scarlet hue. I could see the line of trees in the distance, veiny growths that seemed to be protruding from the fleshy ground like snaking worms. With each pulse of that silent heartbeat, thick crimson fluid burst forth from their branches, drenching their thick trunks in a deep red. Turning towards the village, I could see the rolling hills that obscured it from this side of the B&B. Again, they were made of the same thick, flabby mass as everything else, coated in the same thick black hairs as the grass patches outside of the B&B. Only there was something else that made me feel sick to my stomach. I could see an eye. A large, bloodshot eye rolled frantically around just underneath the fleshy mound of the hill. It seemed to flail around randomly, scanning the area under its membranous mound before it turned my way. As soon as its gaze rolled onto me, it stopped dead, staring at me. Its bloodshot pupil contracted, as though it was trying to get a better look at me. But there was something unnerving about the nature of the look. The only way I can describe it is that it felt like it was looking with the same sense of longing as the couple upstairs. Just as I'm beginning to try and process this horrific sight, a wet sound from my left steals my attention. A low, wet, gurgling sound mixed with a horrendous cracking, like the snapping of bones. Gingerly, I turn my head, not wanting to see the source of that wretched noise, but unable to stop myself. I can make out movement in the distance just before the tree line. The silhouette of several large creatures comes into view in the distance. They're huge, almost as tall as the veiny trees themselves. I can't quite make them out clearly from here, but what I can see sends screams of primal panic through me. Limbs, skeletal and sinuous, composed of multiple joints, lead up to a thick mass of wriggling flesh. From a large tear just under where the creature's heads should have been, drooped several thick red tendrils, swinging back and forth through the air, reaching out in different directions as though scenting for something. They wrapped around the protruding bones around their opening, licking at the taut gray skin beyond. Overwhelmed by what I was seeing and sure that I was going mad, all I could do was scream. I screamed until my throat was hoarse and my lungs burned. I was shivering. The feeling of being alone and trapped was pressing down on me. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't wake up. I wasn't sure if I was even dreaming. I couldn't go outside. Who knows what those creatures were or wanted, or even the eye. I couldn't go back inside with whatever that thing in the pool was or the couple hanging from the hooks, their eyes begging longingly. Everything reeled around in my head, fighting for control. Unable to think clearly, I did the only thing that I felt would provide me with some kind of comfort. Turning around, I ran back inside the B&B. I tried slamming the door behind me to hide away from the monstrosities outside, but it fought me every inch of the way, leaving a trail of red in its heavy wake. Eventually, after great exertion on my part, it relented, sliding back into place and sealing the outside away. Turning to the pool, it began to bubble and roil violently, the thick, sulfurous stench clogging my lungs. I ran for the stairs, not paying attention to the pool, knowing that if I saw whatever was in there, my resolve would leave me completely. I needed to get to my room. If I could just get there, then I could get my things. Think of a plan. I'd be safe, for a while at least. Grabbing the banister, I was about to put my foot on the bottom step when the whole gelatinous staircase moved violently, reflexively. I waited a few seconds for it to complete its aggressive writhing before it gradually shrank back. Pushing myself to get up it as quickly as I could, not wanting it to throw me off them again, I took the stairs 2 at a time. Fighting for balance the entire way, my feet sinking into the flabby steps, I finally reached the landing, stumbling on all fours to my room. Forcing the fleshy door back into its frame, I frantically dragged my bed across the room. Large purple bruises appeared on the floor as its heavy feet tugged harshly against the skin. I positioned it in front of the door, throwing anything else I could on top of it to barricade myself in before slumping down to my knees. The weight of everything I had witnessed came crashing down on me, and tears welled up in my eyes as the hopelessness of my situation set in. I sat there, clutching my knees and sobbing, for what felt like hours. Eventually, the red hue of my room was gradually replaced with the yellow glare of the rising sun. I lifted my head from my hands, not believing what I was seeing. The walls, the flesh of the walls seemed to rescind, slowly replaced by the blue and gold that lined them before. I could feel the floor beneath me moving, slowly returning to the hardwood planks that I'd stepped on when I first entered. The puddles of thick red liquid seemed to leak away, vanishing into the cracks between the boards, with the stench of iron and decay still lingering for a short time afterwards. Within a few minutes, it was as though nothing had ever happened. The room had returned to normal other than the pile of furniture barring the door. I needed to get out, go home, and go anywhere other than here. I didn't feel safe. I couldn't trust what I'd seen or was seeing. I tore at the barricade, removing as much of the furniture as I needed in order to squeeze my way out through the now solid oak door. I shakily made my way through the hallway outside, now also returning to its same dingy state. The carpet was soft under my feet as I gingerly walked down the stairs, the entire time expecting them to buck and throw me off in an aggressive reflex. "Hey there, how'd you sleep?" I hear it in a cheery voice from my right. My heart sinks as the thoughts of last night fill my brain again. The images of Jerry and Nancy hanging from those hooks, the expressions on their faces, and the sounds of their screams echo in my mind. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said as he saw my haggard face, concern filling his voice but not reflected in his blank expression. I could see the same look of longing in his eyes again, and I dropped my gaze. I couldn't stand to look at him. As my gaze lowered, I could see Jerry's arm again. The hairs on my neck stood on end, and I ran for the door as I knew the events of the previous night were definitely real. Shouts of confusion followed me, but I kept running. I needed to get away as far away as I could. When I looked at Jerry's arm, I could see a new wound near the location of the old one. That in itself isn't what terrified me, though. Sure, he was old, and he could have gotten that wound anywhere. Only this one still had a hook hanging from it. My mother and dad split when I was little, so I always celebrated Thanksgiving with my mom. Looking back, I know that she tried, but it's obvious now how little she could afford. We'd start the day with a Thanksgiving service at church, and I'd run around the playground with my friends until it was time to go. We'd make a stop at my dad's house for lunch. My parents were on good terms, so we all ate together. To be honest, it was always the one meal I looked forward to every year. It was the only time I felt like I had a normal family. After lunch, we'd go back home and clean up. Even though we were eating frozen food, my mom really made it feel like Thanksgiving. She'd set the table with silverware, light some dollar store candles, and line the table with the same cheap red tablecloth every year. We'd eat around 6, and that was it. We'd all split off and do our own thing. It started when I was in the 5th grade. After dinner that year, my mom went to her room, which was strange because typically we'd spend at least an hour or two binge-watching Charmed. She went to her room and went to bed around 7. I just figured she wasn't feeling well, so I went to my room and played Minecraft all night. I went to bed at midnight, but was woken up by the sound of quiet sobs through the wall that separated our rooms. I got closer, and the sobs got louder and louder. She started muttering my dad's name. I decided to go comfort her, but that's when she began screaming. I ran to her door, but it was locked. I got my sister from the porch, and we unlocked the door to find her sound asleep in bed, as if she'd been lying there for hours. I woke her up and asked her what was wrong. She just laughed gently and hugged me. She said something I'll never forget. "You're mine, not his." Then she told me to turn off the light and let her go back to sleep. So I did. The next day I asked her what she meant by what she said, and she looked puzzled and said she didn't remember us even waking her up. It plagued me for days, but by Christmas, I'd completely forgotten about it. When I got to high school, my mom had married a real estate agent. Let's call him Phil. Phil was nice enough. The stereotypical stepfather who always stayed distant for fear of overstepping some boundaries. For my mom, though, Phil was the best thing that had happened to her in a long time. He moved her into a nicer area with a beautiful home. By now, I'd gotten my learner's permit and had started staying with my dad more than before. I had gone from seeing him every other weekend to living with him for the better part of the month. The main reason was because my dad lived substantially closer to my school. I had talked to my mom about it, and while she definitely seemed upset, she said she understood. Looking back, the look in her eyes should have told me otherwise. That year, for the first time, Thanksgiving dinner felt a lot more like other families. A fresh turkey, more sides than we could fit into our fridge at the end of the night. And now, with Phil's side of the family, we had to bring out a second table. At the end of the night, everyone got a little too drunk, so I went to bed early, hoping not to have a hangover the next day. I know, 9th grade is too young to be drinking, but what can I say? I had an awesome mom. I woke up that night to the sound of screaming coming from my mom's room. We didn't even sleep on the same floor anymore, but I could still hear her. I went to my sister's room to get her to come with me, but her door was locked. I decided to go to her room alone. What should I be afraid of? This time her door wasn't locked. It was cracked open, and what I saw still creeps me out. My mom was standing at the foot of her bed, staring at Phil. Her arms were at her sides, but they looked longer than usual. She'd been hung by her arms for days. They hung down past her knees. Her mouth hung open like she was a snake about to swallow a baby deer. Her mouth wasn't moving, but I heard a whisper that sounded like her. It was coming from all around, and she was saying a name. My father's name. I slammed the door and ran back to my room. I didn't ask her about it the next day. I didn't want to know. I was terrified. She was walking around the house hungover like the rest of us. I tried to leave and go to my dad, but before I left, she looked at me in the eyes and said, "Sorry about last night. I must have had too much to drink." I left without saying goodbye, and I haven't talked to her since. I haven't told anyone why, and of course my friends and family think I'm horrible for avoiding her, but I just can't get over what I saw. Even worse, she knows that I saw it. It's been over a year now, and I decided to have Thanksgiving with my dad this year. It was weird, to be honest. Thanksgiving has always been such an important holiday for me to spend with my mom. I missed her, but I couldn't get over what I saw. After dinner that night, I broke out my laptop and started playing Minecraft on it. I was falling asleep when I started to hear faint crying. I thought I was imagining it, but the sobs got louder and louder until I knew what I was hearing was real, and that it was coming from my closet. I looked and saw it cracked with my mother inside staring at me. Her jaw was down so low it must have been dislocated, and her eyes were as bloodshot as if she'd been staring at me for hours. I yelled at her, asking what the hell she was doing in my closet. She just stared at me, and as if I were surrounded by whispers, I heard the last words I'd ever hear. "You're mine, not his."